I appreciated Kelly's prayer. I appreciate him praying for us, and I sometimes think that we think of praying for everyone else, but we want to remember to pray for ourselves and each other also. It's always good to remember. It is getting close to Christmas. Christmas is going to come next Saturday, and we want to remember that. Remember that Christ did come. You know, it wasn't a couple of weeks ago we took Betty Jo to Chickasha, and that's her old stomping grounds, and she showed us around. And Kay was born there, but we also have a wonderful Christmas lights display. In particular for a kind of small town, it's really nice. As we look at that, we got to talking about, and Betty Jo was noticing how many nativity scenes there were. There were not many, but there were a few, and we do see that a little bit. Not as much as we used to, but we do see some nativity scenes. Now this part of our lesson today is audience participation. How many different animals do we see in nativity scenes? What are the animals? What do we see? Camels.
Sheep.
Donkey.
Sheep.
Cow. Sheep. Yeah.
No pigs.
No pigs. Wonder why, huh? But now, how many of those are in the biblical account? Have you thought? I'm not criticizing it. I'm not. I realize that, you know, the wise men, we don't know how many there were, whether there were 3 or 100, we don't know. But they didn't get there on the night Jesus was born. But they're part of the message, and that people incorporate that into part of the message. Sheep or the shepherd are mentioned, but it doesn't say anything about them bringing the sheep. That they laid Jesus in a manger, that's in the Bible, but it doesn't talk about any other animals that were been there. I think it's okay to put it in there. I'm just saying there's a little difference there. But what is the only animal that I can think of, and y'all may correct me, that the Bible tells us was at the birth of Christ? You see, there are different accounts of Christ's birth. We have the one in Matthew, we have the one in Luke, but there are other accounts of Christ's beginning also. There is one that the Apostle John gives us in Revelation. And I know that Revelation is filled with imagery and poetry, and it's not supposed to be taken as it's a message, not necessarily reality. But it always reminds me that when we're talking about what was there, let's just see. Here's Revelation 12. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So we see that in Revelation it talks about the red dragon being there at Christ's birth. We don't see that in many manger scenes, do we? We don't see the big red dragon. And that's all right. I'm not trying to say, but here's just an artist's example of what he envisions the red dragon to be. That does tell us. Continue on there in Revelation 12. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So we see that the great red dragon, who was waiting there for the birth of Christ to devour the infant child, was unsuccessful. We know that. We know that heaven was victorious in that conflict, and that we have the right to rejoice because of that. But sometimes I think it's important to remember that Christ came not in a warm, fuzzy situation, not as we try to make it look sometimes, but he came in a time of conflict. He came in a time when there was an empire who wanted to not have him come into the world, that the powers of darkness were against him. And we see that Herod, when he learned of Christ's birth, what does he do? He orders all the baby boys under 2 years of age to be killed. This was a time of oppression that he came in. But I think one of the greatest things that we see there is we see that there was darkness And a lot of that was just that people did not understand. And when we look at our lives today, and we think about Christ coming, let's remember that there is oppression in the world today. There is time to shine a light into the darkness, to shine a light of God's presence into the world today. That was true then, and it's true today, that need for light. And when we talk about origin stories of Jesus, we have one in Matthew, where Matthew goes all the way back, gives that genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Abraham, to show that he was a good Jewish boy. In Luke, we have the genealogy of Jesus going all the way back to Adam, more of a Gentile audience. But there's also an origin story of Jesus in the book of John. John here talks about it in Revelation, but in his gospel, he also talks about the origin of Jesus. He doesn't talk about great red dragons, but he does talk about light and darkness. So we're going to read in John 1, the first 18 verses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not made anything that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." Now, one of the things that we see in this, when we look at this passage, it goes right back to Genesis. In the beginning. We see that in the very first verse of the Bible, in the beginning. And we see it here again, that Christ was with God in the beginning. That Christ is God. And he chose to come and dwell among us. I find that to be one of the most fascinating verses in the Bible, that he chose to come and dwell among us. And we kind of sometimes we think, why would he do that? Why would the creator of heaven and earth come to dwell amongst us? And it was, I think it tells us here, because he was the light, and he was going to shine in the darkness. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. When we look at that, the shining of the light in the darkness, think about us today. Do we have darkness in our world today? Whether that is evil in our world today, or whether that is ignorance in our world today, or whether it is something as simple as loneliness at the time of Christmas, that is darkness that needs a little light to be shined. You know, I was listening to an expert this week. You know, that's one thing on now that you have Zoom. Used to you had to go to class, you had to go drive somewhere or fly somewhere. Not anymore, you just listen to Zoom. But they were talking about the great increase in the number of calls to the mental health hotlines. Not necessarily just suicide hotlines, but your mental health hotlines. That calls are just increasing all the time. And we have records being set of calls to these hotlines. And some of that's probably because there's more hotlines out there. And that's good, because if people need to talk to somebody, we need to have someone listening. And so I think sometimes we talk about the darkness in our world, and that's easy to look, and it's part of it. The violence that we see. The acrimony we see amongst us. The inability to be able to communicate with each other. All those things are there. We see the hunger. We see people in trouble. But also, I think, if we're talking about shining our light into the darkness, we want to be talking about how we can shine a light in our community. And when we think about that, Tanya was telling about delivering treat bags and coming upon people who are having trouble getting out because of physical limitations or whatever it may be. And how maybe we need to shine a light into their lives a little bit. And which we can do. Sometimes I'm not sure that we can do so much about all the ills of the world. But I think we can do something about our own community. I think when we see Christ living in us and we show that to others, we show a light shining in the darkness. And you may be lucky because it's going to get a little shorter today. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to make it all the way through this. But we're going to shorten it up a little. That's all right. But as we see Christ coming, He has come to show us life and light. Christ is life and light. He was life and light when He came, and He's life and He's light today. And when we look at what He did, Jesus showed us God. You know, before that, we could read about God. We can still read about God. We can read about God. We can look at the world around us and we can see God in His creation. But Jesus came so that we might know God. He came and He showed us, this is God. Here I am living amongst you. And that is an amazing thing. But one of the other things that Jesus came, which I find to be fascinating and awesome, is He came so He could know us. So He would know what it was like to live the life that we live. To face the temptations. To face those things that we have. Not only was He showing us what God was like, but He was learning what we are like. That we could live together. That we can have Christ living in us. And that is the offer that Christ made, that He offered to come and live amongst us and in us. And when He is living in us, when we trust Christ, when we put our lives in His hands, and He lives in us, His light shines out of us. That His life in Christ so permeates our lives that that light shines into the darkness. Not our light, but Christ's light living in us. You know, sometimes we think that Christianity is a matter of beliefs and creeds and ideas. And those are very important. But in reality, it's the way we live our lives. It's the way that we show Christ living in us. Now yes, we have beliefs that we believe in. We have things that are very important. Faith in Christ. But it is that life living within us that shines out, that makes a difference. It makes a difference not only in our lives, but also with each other. I'm going to skip down this one. We've got several in here that we're going to just kind of go on through. This is the Message, Eugene Peterson. It's not his translation, but his idea of the Bible. And this is John 1:14 according to him. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. That the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. And He moved into our neighborhood. And He is here with us today. And as part of our neighborhood, as part of our community, we want to let that light shine. We want to let it shine in the darkness. Because so many times we think of Christmas as being a time of joy and peace and cheer. And it is. But let's remember it's not for everybody. That there are people lonely on Christmas. That they miss their family on Christmas. That they miss their loved ones. And there may have other reasons too, but those are the ones that really strike with me. And so let's not forget that. Let's not forget that somebody may need a smile. That somebody may need a touch. Because that's one of the things that Jesus did. He was never afraid to touch people. And that is something that I'm not, don't get, I've already told you, Mary, that I'm not, no hugging today. but it is one of the things that does share that joy, that does share that light, is when we have touch with one another. And I want us to remember that. As we go forward today, let's remember that Christ came, that He became flesh, and He lived among us so that we might know Him and that we might know God. And one of the things that we know, this is eternal life, that they know You, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom You have sent. To know God, to know Christ, is life. And Christ came to give us life and to give us light, and that we might share it. If anyone has a need today, if anyone has a prayer or a concern, or if you have something that we can help you with, or if you need to put on the Lord in baptism, if you would come while we stand and as we sing.